online already, because this is not only a podcast, it's also a live stream. So it's not only good to see you, but it's good to be seen by you and good to be heard by you. Really glad that you're with us here on a Common Good Politics Tuesday, where Rob Ryerse and I talk about this big need that we all have for some common good in our politics. And here's the big question that I have, and we're going to pursue it in this podcast. As long as we've got breath in our lungs, why is it that the common good is so hard to find in politics? Why is it that we've allowed our politics to become something that divides and separates us into winners and losers, rather than our political call to be, there has to be something common and there has to be something good? Like, why do the two of those things seem like they sit in such opposition to one another so often for so many of us? And I'm sitting here in the studio in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the studio of Faith, Hope, and Love. And it's freezing cold outside, like it is in much of the country, as it turns out. And we'd love to know where you are, where you're sitting, where you're standing, where you're listening. So if you're on the podcast only, shoot us over a note at podcast@voteCommonGood.com. And if you're on the live stream, let us know down in the chat where are you coming from, where are you, and are you now here or are you nowhere, as the philosophers like to say, which is like the cheesiest of philosophy ideas. Hey, joined by our Tuesday co-host, Rob Ryerse. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Doug. Coming to you from very cold and snowy northwest Arkansas, which doesn't get a lot of cold and snowy, but woke up this morning, opened the weather app on my phone, and saw that it was 10 below outside, which is not something we normally get down here.
Rob, I was shocked to see people in Arkansas saying it was 10 below. I mean, that's colder than it was way up north here in Minneapolis, up on the Canadian border, where we find ourselves. That's unbelievable. Is that a record low? Is that something that people are going to mark on their record books?
Yeah, it sounds like where I was this morning, it sounded like overnight it got to 17 below in my town, and in nearby Fayetteville, Arkansas, it got to 20 below overnight, which was absolutely a record low.
Unreal. And you know what this provokes? I mean, especially in Arkansas, you know this is coming. The person on their live stream, on their podcast, on the radio show.
What happened to global warming?
There it is. I thought we were heating the planet up. How come it's not so cold now?
Yeah.
And then somebody comes back and says a very unhelpful statement. It's global weirding, not global warming. Have you heard that phrase?
No.
Meaning that the weather patterns are getting weirder, not just warmer. So, so much to fuss with and to worry about in all of those things. And, of course, we are experiencing, all of us, a changing climate. And the planet is warming. And we have to be reminded all the time, even though this is not our Science Friday around here. This is not our conversation about the environment. But there's a difference between climate and weather.
Yes.
Which we know, like, climate is the big systems shift, the big system that weather operates within. And there's a difference. So you could have changing climate and still have a weather event. Now, that notion, I think, brings us to what we should talk about today on our desire for some kind of a common good politics. And that is, are we in a weather experience in this country? Or is this a climate shift that's happened? Did Trumpism, Donald Trump and gutless Republicans, did they just behave in ways that we will look back on and say, boy, that was a cold winter? Or do we look back and say, that was an indicator that the climate has changed and we ain't never going back? And that's the question I think that a lot of us are asking ourselves and trying to figure out. I was of the opinion, Rob, I don't know where you were, that there was a fever that was high in the air and the good people of this country were, enraptured with a despot of a president and political candidate, but the fever was going to break. I was sure of it. I was using fever metaphors. And now I'm thinking about this more in terms of climate and in terms of weather. Where do we find ourselves? Is this something that's going to change? Or is this just the conditions that every other weather pattern is gonna take place within? I don't know. I don't know if you have a thought on that already, or
Well, I think we need to just pause for a moment and recognize the really profound and wonderful metaphor that you've come up with for us to think about this, because that's a really, really good one.
should
I
we
think
just
I
close
was
our
the
eyes and give a word of thanks? Should we just pause right now and give a word of thanks? Okay, go on.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice metaphor.
I was one of those people who thought that Trump was an anomaly, that it was that crazy storm that we'd look back on in 10 years ago. Oh man, you remember that storm? My fear now, after the election, after the insurrection, after the impeachment, and the seeming refusal to actually repudiate Trump and Trumpism, because frankly, your strongly worded speeches, Mitch McConnell, Rob Portman, like, not really helpful, not really making any kind of difference at all. So like actual repudiation of Trump and Trumpism hasn't happened. And that is deeply disturbing and worrisome, that we are in fact in the midst of a climate change in our politics, as opposed to a horrific but one-off kind of storm.
I think you're right. I think we're not in a moment of the 100-year storm. I think we're in the middle of political climate change, and we're going to have to come to grips with this. Now, we haven't had a chance yet to talk here since the impeachment vote, so this is our chance to delve a bit into that. And I know we've been making the promise that at some point we're going to stop talking about Donald Trump, and we will. We will. Mm-hmm. But right now, this set of conditions is still upon us, and to understand how we can get to a common good politic, we have to figure out what's going on, because in a lot of ways we have transcended Donald Trump, and we are full now into what do our elected leaders do and how do they think. Now, I will say, look, Democrats voted in the impeachment case in the House and in the impeachment trial all together, lockstep. Was that partisan? I don't know. Maybe the idea was, hey, as Republicans or as Democrats, we are going to vote this way no matter what. You don't get to shift. You don't get to change no matter what you think. Is it possible that a House member or that a senator thought, actually, I kind of agree with the other side, but I don't have the right to. I mean, I'm just going to stick with the party line. Is that what's gone on? I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine that anybody in the House and anyone in the Senate wouldn't have voted with the charges and to convict. But we should just say we don't know, right? We don't know if this fever of stick with your party no matter what, this idea of party politics above all else, which you saw from Mitch McConnell, you saw from Lindsey Graham, you certainly saw from Ted Cruz, is that only on the Republican side? I would like to believe that it's not. I would like to believe that the Democrats are operating in a more open space to their convictions and their knowledge, and I want to grant that to them. I wanted to grant that to the Republicans as well. They could have, they should have. I mean, 7. We talked about, Dan and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think this structures out how society is, that there's about 15% of Americans who are Republicans who are willing to stay against Trump. There's about 50% who are like, I don't really know, I'm just sticking with my brand. And then there's about 30%, 35% that are all for Trump no matter what. And to watch someone like a Lindsey Graham say on the Senate floor in the, as they like to say, wee hours of January 7th after the insurrection, hey, I did everything I could for the guy. I'm done with him. We're over. And then to come back and say, I just can't leave you. I just need you. And I'm committed to you no matter what. To watch a person in public without any sense of irony or shame just do that tells you that there's some kind of power within the Republican Party, that someone with the kind of reputation and history of a Lindsey Graham, which is scattered and I think unhonorable, but yet he's a significant player. There are no leaders. There are no leaders. And Rob, the question I have for you as a Republican is,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody who grew up as a Republican, is this just a sign that Republicans were always sellouts? Or did something change with a new batch of elected officials brought to us by a new set of political aspirations in this country and political thinking? Like, have we just changed, or does this do you ultimately look back and say, oh, this thing was broken from the core? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would love to think that Republicans haven't always been this way. It seems to me that the Republican Party used to be a party that had ideas, and kind of bold ideas about governing, and whether you agree with them or not, that's not the point I'm making.
It could hardly knock the smirk off my face. Yes, right.
Yes, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there was a party, the Republican Party was a party that was proposing, had leaders in the party that were proposing ideas as solutions to problems that we were facing as the American people. There was, I mean, and you can look back on the contract with America. You can think about, people like Jack Kemp, and there was, in the Republican Party, there were big, bold ideas to try to address issues. You don't see that now. Yep. The place where you see big, bold ideas that try to address issues is on the Democratic side, and I would even say from the progressive wing of the Democratic side, that the place where you're getting big, bold ideas now is, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, those kinds. And again, not to debate the specific issues of whether you agree with them or not. What was the last Republican idea?
Well, and frankly, a tax cut was the last. It was the last Republican idea.
But that's nothing new. Like that's not bold. That's not interesting. That is what it's always been. And frankly, when was the last time a centrist Democrat had a big idea? I think what we're seeing is that there is a lack of boldness. When Joe Biden said nothing will fundamentally change in his presidency, there's a little bit of that, like there's a little bit of status quo. And so I think, and you asked about Republicans, and I've kind of veered into Democrats here. But I think what we see with the Republican Party is a party that is committed first and foremost to preserving its own power. Yeah. And that's it. And so I think when we ask the question of how could these Republican senators not convict Donald Trump of this when he literally put their lives in jeopardy and the life of his vice president? I mean, literally in jeopardy. And they just completely dismiss it. I think, and I've proffered this theory before, I think the only explanation is that Donald Trump has threatened to start the Patriot Party. And if he were to do that and gut the Republican Party of that 35% of diehard supporters he has, Republicans wouldn't win elections anymore. They're having a hard enough time winning them now, but like they wouldn't win elections anymore. And their political lives depend on placating Donald Trump.
Which is just unbelievable, right? That the belief that this former failed presidential candidate, this person who oversaw the decimation of so many things that were honorable in this country and then lost profoundly, had inspired more people to vote for the other candidate than any candidate in history. That's the guy that you're so afraid of. That somehow this party, that nobody in the party has felt for 5 years that they could wrestle away the affection and the care of Donald Trump has of these voters. It's outrageous. And this is why I disagree. I've changed my mind. I disagree with myself. If I had to cut my previous prognostications and my previous explanations, I would disagree with myself now. I don't think that it's about we're just afraid of the voters. I don't think that anymore. I think there's 30% of senators, congresspeople, voters who actually believe that Donald Trump is right about the things that so many of us are terrified by. Mm-hmm. That the racism, the xenophobia, that the idea that it's all about identity and keeping other people out, and I think they believe it. I think that the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world and the Congresswoman Boeberts, I think these people, I think there's people who buy it. I think that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz heard something in Donald Trump that while they opposed his tactics when he first got in the race, they ended up saying, I agree with him. Lindsey Graham says, I agree with him. Adam Kinzinger, who now is out being all anti-Trump, voted for him. These are people who I don't think the issue is I'm afraid of the voters. I think we have to stop saying that these people are simply gutless and can't seem to wrestle away the affection. I think it is they say to themselves, I agree with him, and now I don't know what to do because the party doesn't seem to want to take my perspective. When Lindsey Graham came out and said 2022 is going to be MAGA plus, like Disney plus, like it's going to be all MAGA with a bonus. That idea, he's not saying that because he's placating the voters. He's saying that because he wants to lead. And he's saying he wants to lead because he believes it. Why we keep saying that these politicians are so dishonest, that Ron Johnson is just dishonest, and he truly believes one thing, but boy, he can't say it. Like, we should stop believing that. A lot of us had to come to grips that Donald Trump wasn't just saying it. Donald Trump believed it. So I have pivoted now on this, and I think the only way we're going to get to the common good is to actually have it out, to actually have out the conversations, to have out the arguments, to go after these big notions. And the new big notion is not about policy, and the new big notion is not going to be about ideology. The new big notion is about identity and who are we as political parties and who are we as American citizens. And what country do we want? These things have always been around. These things have always been being ginned up. There's always been people going after this. And we have to wrestle with these same issues in our day. The racism, the xenophobia, the keep people out, the be cruel to be kind sort of philosophy of politics, all of that stuff always been around. And we used to say, but it's not who we're going to be in the future. It may be who we are now, and it might have been how we acted in the past, but by golly, there's a different vision for the future. Boy, you listen to Matt Gaetz, who's a congressman from Florida. He went up to Montana and sat in a cafe and said to people, there's a battle within the Republican Party, and you're going to either let the Liz Cheneys and the Mitch McConnells, who are the dinosaurs of the past, continue to control this party, or we're going to move boldly into the future with MAGA plus. I'm only paraphrasing in part. He said all of those things, right? Yep. Here's a guy who's saying, we believe it, not we're kowtowing to the voters. So I don't know. I think that we have to move to a new space on this one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I think you're right that I think there is I think there's some spectrum here. I think there's probably some there's some principled, is that the right word? People who are true believers of Trumpism. I think there's probably some that hate it and don't know what to do about it. And then I think there's probably some in the middle who think, yeah, I agree with the beliefs, but I don't like the tactics. Mm-hmm. Can't we have a kinder, gentler Trumpism? And I think there's probably that spectrum amongst Republican leaders, and Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and is it Boebert or is it Boebert?
Wow, I don't know. You know, where I come from, we just pronounce the T's in the world of Pagitt, because Pagitt is, while it's classy, it's I don't know. I just can't land it. It's
Yeah.
we pronounce. In fact, we pronounce both T's where I come from.
Yeah. I pronounce both B's and Rob too. So I think there's, so the question becomes is, who's going to own the future of the Republican Party? That is what is at stake.
I don't think it's up for debate any longer.
You don't.
I don't.
Yeah. So is it going to be? Well, is it going to be the pure Trumpists who own the Republican brand and take along with them those who agree on the policies, but are squeamish about the tactics at times? Or is it going to be those who disagree with Trumpism and who take along, like, which one will take along the Republican brand, will take along the the people that are kind of in the middle?
Well, I guess the question would be, how could we know? Would there be a possible test case that we could use? Would there be some indicator from the last, I don't know, 5 days when we would know which side is going to be? When maybe the House Republicans could vote. Maybe they could vote about what they're going to do with Liz Cheney and what they're going to do with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Liz Cheney being, I mean, how in the world does Liz Cheney become the reasonable Republican?
Seriously.
Set that aside for a second. Now, I don't know Liz Cheney. I've never had a chance to spend any time with her. I know her public persona, and I know her feelings on the things she's chosen to talk about publicly that I've chosen to pay attention to. She used to be on the hard edge side, that now she has become the, hey, we're the reasonable Republicans. So if you're going to, I mean, this is going from the frying pan into the fire, as people like to suggest. So maybe we could have a test case, Rob. Maybe we could vote and they could vote and we could all see. Maybe after 7 senators vote to convict the president of what they believe he committed, and they believe it was their constitutional right as the Senate to speak on an impeached president who was impeached while he was in office. Maybe if those senators were censured by their local political party, Republican Party, maybe that would give us an indication of where it sits. Now, we also, not only do we want to complain about all this around here, because we are fully equipped to do such things, but I think it's helpful for people to understand how politics works, that political parties are not necessary features. We choose to organize by political parties, but they don't have to exist, and the names don't have to exist. You have independents who are not part of any party, and then they work with their particular party in Congress. So political parties sit on top of the reality that we have these 538 plus some people from the non-voting territories and so on who represent this country and in all their ways elected federal office. And parties are overlaid on that for organizing purposes, right? But there's nothing in the Constitution about parties. There's nothing in the demand about parties. This is just put together. And the local level of these parties are even more renegade from any legal system. There is no apparatus that is political parties other than they choose to organize that way, right? So if you want to have 11 parties in this country, feel free. And you don't have to work hard because there's already like 11 parties and probably more, right? There's the Constitutionalist Party and the Independence Party and the Marijuana Party and the Get Off My Back Party. And there's just all kinds of political parties, right? They're self-governed organizing groups. Having said that, if they're part of the Republican consortium or the Democratic consortium, they're given some power. So the parties in these states and counties. So there was this fella on, I think he was from Ohio, who was trying to say, and he was the chairman of a county Republican party, like not the state. He's not the chairman of
Mhm.
all
Yep.
Republicans, not even of the state, like of the county, right? So there's lots of layers of this little club that we call Republicanism or Democratic parties. And he says some just outlandish things like, we didn't send our senator there to vote his conscience. We didn't send him there to do what's right. We sent him there to protect the Republican Party. Like, well, you don't actually speak for everyone, right? So these kinds of political parties, I think it would be good if you gave people a little insight into how all of that impacts this really big question about, can we ever get to some kind of a common good or not? Because it seems like the apparatus of the political parties is something that a lot of us don't really understand, and we don't know when it has power and when it doesn't.
Yeah, and it really, what folks need to understand is that there is not a one size fits all solution, across the states. That there are different approaches to this, and there's 50 different approaches to this, and as you pointed out, Doug, in those states, the various counties have all sorts of different approaches. What the parties are able to do is to provide a brand identity that allows for people to have.
Rob, we're losing your audio. I think the storm of Arkansas is wreaking some havoc on your play there. So I'm going to show a little something while you see if you can get some internet connection sort of back to solid. We'll take a pause on this one and jump back. This was a statement that a friend of mine I saw on Facebook, Bruce Epperly, who I like a lot. Hi, Bruce. Hope you're watching. Bruce wrote this, and I think this is really interesting. He was sort of contrasting the moment we find with Biden. Now, look, Bruce, like me, are big fans of Joe Biden, want Joe Biden to be successful, and feel like there's a shift afoot. Bruce writes this: one of the greatest aspects of the Biden presidency comes from what is at first a debit. So he says this could be a negative. I like the way he puts this. That is, there is no cult of Biden. No one assumes that Biden is perfect or that he can't be questioned. No one will censure members of his party for opposing him. His lack of cult-like status may be the best antidote to the cult of Trump. Seeing a real and imperfect person trying to do their best rather than a false god trusting interested only in applause and adulation is healthier in relationships and in politics. Remember, there was no cult of Lincoln in his lifetime. So I think Bruce's point is an interesting one, that we're in this moment where the cult-like following has broken. And I want to add something to it. I was a big supporter of Barack Obama, still am. Welcome him to this podcast anytime. We would clear the deck for him. I would support him in his political endeavors, did support him in his political endeavors. Was also very uncomfortable for 8 years at the level of adulation and praise and lack of critique from Democrats toward Obama. I'm not saying it's anywhere close to what's going on with Trump, but it was over the line for me. It felt like too much to my mind. It felt like the posters and the teary-eyed feelings people would get when they would see him and the way they would talk about the Obamas as if they were royalty. There was a move toward supporting the Obamas and Barack Obama's personhood as president that rose above his role as the president. And I think that's dangerous. I think we have to have presidents who we see with a honest view, that we see clearly, that we respect them as people. But it's easy to get into a place. Now, Barack Obama did not traffic in that in the same way. He didn't try to use it as some sort of weapon that he would unleash on his followers to be sure they stayed. In fact, he said, please stop thinking that I can do all the things. I need all of you. I need you to be active. I need you to work. I need you to be more engaged. But the response of so many people to Barack Obama was so incredibly full of adulation. I was uncomfortable with it. Then you get to Donald Trump, and it goes to an entirely different level. I hope that one of the things Biden does, to Bruce Epperle's point, is that he cleanses our palate of our love affair with the person who is our president. Now, I think politics is all about persons. I think people run politics. I think what we do, we don't vote for policies. We don't even vote for ideology. We tend to vote for people, and as human beings, we tend to respond to people. My own particular view about politics. But it can go over the top, and it has. And I hope we can start talking about how we have proper relationship with our elected officials in this country. Because if we don't get to that, where we're not demonizing the opposition as being morally reprobates in their personhood, even though it's very hard sometimes to watch these people act in a way and then just think, are you a trustworthy person? I get that. I feel it. Lots of people feel it. But, you know, when Adam Kinzinger, he's this Republican congressman, voted against Trump and came out publicly against him, his own family, his cousins sent him a letter that then he released to the press. And they were saying things like, we're disappointed in you and you're a failure, and how, like, breaking of families, right? That level of distinction, I think is problematic. So I think that Biden might give us a moment for people to say he's good enough. And that's what we need in a president. What do you think?
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is I'm thinking about the presidents who have had that level of adulation while they were in office. And I think, you know, Kennedy immediately comes to mind, Reagan, maybe FDR. That's about it, right? Like, that's the list, at least in, you know, kind of modern era. And what's interesting is that what we've never had is two presidents back to back that had that kind of adulation from different ends of the political spectrum. Now, if Kennedy and Reagan were back to back, what would that have done to the political landscape? And so having Obama and Trump back to back, I wonder if that exacerbates the division, exacerbates the sense of distrust and tribalism within the country. That if there's a pause between, if there had been a George W. Bush and a Jimmy Carter between them, maybe it would be different.
You know, and I think you're right, Rob. This is our question, right? Is and it's really not on the candidates, right? I'm not blaming Obama. I'm actually, in some ways, not even blaming Trump for the fact that people give over this level of power, that their political parties give over this level of power. Sure, you're going to get narcissists who are going to run for office, but the fact that there's something in our psyche in this country that wants to give over this to one another. And I'm not blaming us as the victims. I'm saying there's something afoot. There's something going on that we have to address. Part of the systemic problem of our politics, in my mind, part of why we can't seem to find a politics of the common good, is that it has become something where our own identities and our political parties are so strapped to the successes of our mascots, of the people carrying this message. Man, I'm telling you, watching those insurrectionists, and like you, I've watched hundreds of minutes of these insurrectionists doing crazy things, going in there and carrying signs and the things that they're shouting. It is something far more dangerous than just, hey, I really, really love my president and I'm comfortable hanging his picture in my house. Now, I have a Biden-Harris sweatshirt that I wear, but I would never hang a picture of them in my house. I mean, I've got a 1970s retro poster and a picture of Bruce Springsteen. Seems totally appropriate to me hanging in my house. But I'm not going to hang a picture of the president, no matter who it is. But there's a lot of people who would literally blazon on their bodies images of their president. I'm speaking now specifically, of Roger Stone, who has a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. right? That's a kind of commitment that you normally only see from one-off sort of fetish-like relationships with a political leader that you used to work for. That's now spread to whole sectors where now people feel like their own commitment to this leader is something that that has to go unquestioned. And that's the whole point, right? I feel it all the time. You say, for a lot of times, if you say something about Obama policies, Obama procedures, the pushback is unbelievable, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there is not a lot of room. It's nothing like the Republicans. It's nothing like Trump. But I'm just saying this component of all of this is something that we can all address, we can all look at, while we also say that the Republicans have gone off the rails at their elected leader level. See, that's the difference. Of course, voters are going to feel connected to their candidates. Yeah, but we have lots of people that represent us. And when the whole party seems to be unable to critique, unable to condemn, unable to call forward from a limited background. This is why I thought Bruce Epperly's comments were so helpful, that maybe we're in a point where we won't treat this president and this vice president in that same way, and that can allow the tempers to cool some in this country. Because you get the pushback, like the number of people who hated Barack Obama so deeply and became part of their commitment to support someone like Donald Trump, man, that was unbelievable. And dangerous, just frankly dangerous. In fact, I think the two are related: the hatred of Obama and the commitment to Trump. I think they're linked. I think they're almost. I think if the people that I know who are so into Donald Trump were also people that so despised Barack Obama. Now, the people that I know who are super into Joe Biden, it's nothing near any of that, right? It's not only because they're opposed.
You know people that are super into Joe Biden?
yeah. Of course I do. He's the most highly elected president in the history of our country, of course. Think out of these 81 million people, there are people who are like 100% in. But that's rooted in something different than being rooted in a personality-driven approach to the representative who's our president that now transcends the idea that I want that person to represent us. And I think it's hard to talk about. It's hard to even figure out how we talk about it.
Yep. Yeah, and part of it I think is people really want kind of that leader that will give them validation, that will give them inspiration, that will somehow be like a stand-in for themselves. We see this in the religious world quite a bit, where people want a pastor who will kind of be their surrogate when it comes to spirituality. That they think that their pastor is that person who's got it figured out, who has that connection with God, and there's comfort in knowing that at least that person has that, even if I haven't experienced it. It's nice to know that somebody has. And there's kind of that, like, there's that projecting onto our leaders and our own our own insecurities in reverse. We want them to kind of make up for what the failings that we feel like we have in ourselves. And I think that I think that we see that with our political leaders as well. Like we get attached to them because there's something lacking in us that we're hoping can be fixed through them. Yeah.
Our connection to our superheroes. I wrote a book called Outdoing Jesus, and because Jesus's teaching is those who believe in me will do the works that I do and do even greater works than these. And I like to refer to that as Jesus's call for us to outdo what Jesus is doing, to keep doing even greater works than Jesus was up to. Not my idea, Jesus's idea, I would suggest. And one of the ways you have to get over that interplays with this conversation, and that is we have to deal with our hero worship and why we want superheroes in our lives. Why it's going to exist in our fiction, it's going to exist in our religions, it's going to exist in our politics. And we don't like to see our heroes fail. We don't like our sports heroes to fail. Like when you root for someone and they're your person and they're a record holder and someone comes along and breaks their record, it's a confusing moment, right? Do we cheer that on when you're a fan of someone and they're no longer ascending but they're descending? We don't know what to do with our lack of superheroes, and how we deal with the superhero in our lives. I think that's what you're getting at, Rob, is that we struggle. And we have to grow and mature into a place where often for many of us, our own parents played this role of superhero when we were kids. They could sort of do these magical things. And then we hit our adolescence and we're like, my parents are, the worst. And then you become an adult yourself and you look over and you say, I now recognize as a peer the struggles that my parents had that made them wonderful and made them difficult. And we just understand that about one another, right? And we get to something beyond like, well, no one's perfect. No one's asking for perfection, right? Our superheroes function in our lives, in our minds, in our hearts for very powerful reasons. And when those heroes are political leaders, people struggle. And this is why a lot of times people will stay out of politics. And it's not good for the common good, seems to me. We have to have a way to be in politics where you don't have to be so super fan to be in. And you can find yourself in your place inside of our politics. Because fundamentally, this country was built not on superheroes, not on kings, not on princes, but on we the people that are represented by our fellow peoples. And it doesn't feel that way. And it feels like, no, there's an elite class of politicos and they get to serve in those places. And we have a real problem with the fact that so many high profile, prominent leaders come out of the same stream all the time, that it does create a context in which we tend to think some people are special and some people aren't. But a more clear-eyed look at it, and we recognize that's not the case, and we have to break the superhero urge with our political leaders, and yet keep this thing about people, because there's no system that protects us from our leaders. I mean, that's the problem with our democracy, right? It's just us. There ain't no protections. That's become clear as a bell in the last 200 and whatever it is, 46 years of this country, that we are the only things that can protect us, and our vote and certifying those votes are the only things that we have that we know we can all participate in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, since we're plugging books, I in my book Running for Our Lives, in which I tell the story of when I ran for Congress. I've got a chapter entitled "Would You Vote for an Honest Politician?" We all have this sense that, like, well, we want honest politicians. We want our politicians to tell the truth, but we don't want them to tell too much of the truth. We don't want to know what's really going on. We want them to have the answers. We want them to have their lives together. We want them to have things figured out. And what we don't want is for them to say things like, I don't know, I need to study more about that. I need to think about that. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what's going on in my life. We don't want authenticity out of our political leaders. And because that's a really terrifying thing. And what's interesting about Joe Biden strikes me as one of the more authentic kind of leaders we've had, presidents we've had. And those presidents are not always, they're rarely loved and adored in the moment. You think like Jimmy Carter comes to mind. They're not loved and adored in the moment, but history tends to treat them very, very well. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and it's interesting for us. So I had a little experience this morning, not to switch our metaphors from the climate versus the weather moment, but this other experience this morning that I think reflects on this as an analogy. Walking out my driveway to bring my garbage cans down, as we do on Monday nights or Tuesday mornings, and it's cold out. It's -8, -10 degrees, something like that. It's sort of Arkansas weather here in Minneapolis, and I smell the familiar odor of gas again, natural gas. And I've been smelling it the last couple of days. Shelly said we should do something about this. So let's see if it keeps showing up. It did keep showing up. So I came in and got my little tester and went out and found that there was, because I'm the kind of guy that has a gas leak tester.
I was going to ask that question.
Thank you very much. I am that kind of guy. So anyway, I went out, found that on the meter where the big pipe comes out of the meter, there's a big nut on there. Put my little gas tester on there, and bing, 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 bing. That's where the leak is coming from. So I came in, called a lot, it's now 7 a.m, reached out to a plumber company. They called me back and said, oh, if it's the meter and it's outside, you need to call the gas company. We can't deal with that. So I called the gas company, and they started talking me through what they're going to do. So they put in a work order, and then the person on the phone said, here's the deal. You have a gas smell of gas, which means gas is coming out. So there's some real worry here. So they start talking about the worries, right? And we all know, like, I messaged a friend about something and said, hey, I got a gas thing going. I'm not sure my schedule will be as I thought it was going to be today. And he said, like, well, don't let your house blow up. Pretty much what the person from Centerpoint Energy said, like, don't let your house blow up. She said, we advise that this is so dangerous. You need to get out of the house. Where will you be when the tech arrives? And I said, in my house. It's 8 below. I don't know if the neighbors are up. I'm not going to sit in my car. I don't know. I'm not. It's been this way for a day or two. I'm staying in my house. The condition is you smell this thing. What's your response?
Yeah.
So the tech came out, verified. I had a fancy little contraption that I put on, not fancy, it's $25 on Amazon that I bought for another gas leak that I had somewhere else. Put it on there, and bing, 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 a little electronic thing tells me there's a leak. This guy comes out, you know what he's got in his hand? A spray bottle with dish soap in it. This is how you tell a gas leak. So he squirts it on that nut, and it bubbles up. He's like, yep, there it is, which is the other way you find this, sort of old school. So literally the guy from the gas company's got the spray bottle. So he sprays it on there, confirms this is the case. Comes in, checks things in the house, says, I got to get the crew out here to fix this. And I said, hey, is that our responsibility or yours? He goes, well, where this nut is, that's our problem, not yours. So I'm like, great. I don't have to pay for it, right? That's where my mind goes. And I'm still in the house. Person comes, I see a truck pull up. I get my shoes on. I get my coat on. I went out there to see what was going on. The guy's walking away down the driveway. The crew person that came, and the tech who had come out said, well, he's all done. I said, what? He's all done already? Like, the amount of time it took me to see that he was outside, get my winter stuff on, get outside, he's all done. I said, well, what did he do? And he said, well, he just brought his big pipe wrench and just tightened it. That's what they do. And so it's sealed up now. The nut had come a bit loose. 15 seconds of a repair. This is what I don't know where we are. We're smelling this smell. It sounds like the house could blow up. Is that where we are? Or is this, there's a fix. There's a fix for this. And this, again, is just another way of saying the opening part of all this is, where are we? And I'm not sure we know. Unlike a gas leak, I don't think this is, to borrow a Rumsfeld phrase, you might like this, Rob, this is not an unknown known. I think this is an unknown unknown. We don't yet know what the future of this is, because we are the gas meter. We are the gas. We are the house. Like, this is social ordered. The decisions we make in the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and I hope in the next 20 years, I hope we look back. And if you've wondered why we do what we do at Vote Common Good, whether it's a daily podcast or it's traveling the country or it's recruiting candidates and training them or it's messaging or it's asking you to be in for 10, which we'd like for all of you to go to votecommongood.com and be in for $10 a month with us so we can keep all this work going. Well, all this stuff is because I want people to look back in 20 years and to say to themselves, 20 years ago, religious people voted for their political party without thinking about it. That's not that way anymore. What changed? I want someone to look back and say, well, 20 years ago, people started doing some things. Not a 2-year cycle, not a 4-year cycle, a 20-year cycle, or 25 or 40 years, however long it takes for people to stop and look back and say, no, people rose up, people spoke up, and they did some things that all came together to make the set of conditions that we live in 2040 different than they were in 2020? Because you can look back to 2000 and to 1980 and to 1960 and watch 20-year time passages and see that people were making decisions. So I just think this is where we find ourselves. Do we know if this is a 15-second fix with a big pipe wrench, or is this, you really got to get out of this house, we're bringing a crew out and we're shutting gas off on the street? I don't know where we find ourselves. I hope that we're going to do the things that we have to do to get this situation resolved.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Thank you. And thanks for all of you for listening. Hey, by the way, I didn't know till I was watching Facebook, because I learned a lot of things when I watch Facebook, mostly about like products that I really shouldn't buy. Yeah. But I also learned that Rob Ryerse has launched an additional podcast called It's Pronounced Ryerse. So if you want more of Rob and you want less, if you want all Rob and no Doug, that's available to you. That's something you can get yourself to. Where do these good people find It's Pronounced Ryerse, as which is the name of the podcast?
You can find it on my Facebook page. I believe we're now listed on Apple, and so you can find us on iTunes, and we will soon be available in all of the podcast places. So,
and you might know that it's pronounced Ryerse, but how you spell that is anybody's guess, because Siri calls it Ryerse.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right, Rob with 2 B's. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Our podcasts are brought to us by a whole team of people, including Mary Beth and Dan and Britton and Tim and Rob, the whole crew and many others, the whole crew. And really serious about you subscribing to the podcast. We would love it if you'd be willing to give us your subscription over at podcast.com. And you might know that we do this podcast on Monday, where we talk about common good news. On Tuesdays, of course, this podcast. On Wednesdays, tomorrow, we talk about faith with Laura and Stephanie, Dominique, and myself. On Thursdays, we talk about important issues. For the next 2 weeks, we're continuing our conversation around abortion, and a fascinating set of conversations there. We'd really invite you to join us. And of course, on Fridays, it's science, or sometimes it's economics, sometimes it's earth science. And this week, it's going to be all about the sky with an astrophysicist, Paul Wallace. So subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel if those are your places. If that's all new to you and you're wondering how you can be more part of what we do at Vote Common Good, go over to votecommongood.com, sign up for all the ways to be involved, all the engagements that go on. Be sure you get on our mailing list, and we'd love to stay in touch with you. So thanks all for being a part of this, and it means a lot to us, and we hope it means a lot to you. And we'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Central Time. Wednesdays, it's a bright and early Wednesday, where we launch the podcast at 9 a.m. instead of 10 a.m. Rob, any final words for the common good of the all?
I think everybody needs to go out and tighten the nuts around their gas lines.
Is that could be a new Vote Common Good campaign? Tighten the nut. But get a professional. Even though when he left, I thought, I could have done that. I could have done that.
Yeah, could have done that.
It's a good thing I didn't. All right. Hey, thanks all. We'll see you. We'll see you tomorrow morning and next week. Tomorrow morning for faith, next week for politics on Tuesdays.